Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some wild news coming out of this USC program early Tuesday afternoon as defensive lineman Bear Alexander announces that he's expected to enter the transfer portal when that window opens early next week. Now, you fast forward to Wednesday morning when we're diving into this conversation, it sounds like USC is doing everything they can to keep Bear Alexander with this program, and that him entering the transfer portal is not as much of a foregone conclusion that we thought it was, 12 hours ago when this news came out. I want to dive into this conversation from a couple of different lenses. One, keeping Bear Alexander, have that conversation of what that means for USC, but also have that conversation that if Bear Alexander does in fact enter the transfer portal, yes, it sucks to lose a player the caliber of Bear Alexander. It does represent a unique opportunity for USC to maybe enhance this defensive line heading into 2024. I want to be careful of how I phrase that because I'm a massive fan of Bear Alexander and what he brings to this USC defense. We'll get into that. We'll talk about Bear Alexander. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. A massive shout out to the USC fans. It has been a blast talking this program over the last couple of weeks on the recruiting trail. The amount of support the USC fans have shown the boys truly does mean a lot. It's no secret. I love talking about this program. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, but much more importantly, would love to hear some feedback on this situation from your guys' point. I've been kind of mulling these ideas over in my head for the last 12 hours. Would love to get some feedback from you guys. Now, let's dive into Bear Alexander, and let's start with him being a massive priority to keep him with this USC program. I've been extremely vocal all offseason long that Bear Alexander has the potential to be one of the more dominant players in football in 2024. And you go back to the 2023 year, it was only his second year of college football, coming from Georgia, where he didn't play all that much as a true freshman. You go to the film of Bear Alexander, he was extremely dominant at times. And although he flashed the dominance, the consistency might not have always been there. I think USC fans know from watching him in 2023 that he is a very special talent. And going into year 3, that's normally when you see these kind of guys along the line of scrimmage really break out. That's when they kind of get that grown man strength and really are able to play along the line of scrimmage at their highest level. But also the combination of Coach Henderson coming in, being a proven developer of some of the best defensive linemen that we've seen play the sport of football. I think a lot of USC fans are excited about not only what Bear Alexander was in 2023, but more importantly, what he can be in 2024 for this USC team. There is zero question about it. He makes this USC defensive line better. It needs to be a priority to kind of keep him within this program heading into 2024. But I want to get into a conversation that I want to be careful with how I phrase this in terms of, all right, if Bear Alexander does in fact enter the transfer portal, I've been thinking about this over the last 12 hours. Does this potentially add a unique opportunity for USC to potentially enhance this defensive line heading into 2024? And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I've always been a huge proponent of, yes, you want star talent, game wreckers on that defensive line. Bear Alexander, certainly one of those names. But I've been a huge believer that really makes defensive lines and, quite frankly, defenses in general great is depth on the defensive line. And that was one question that we had a massive question mark for USC, where, yes, they made some nice additions, guys like Isaiah Rakes, Nate Clifton. We're going to talk about those guys in just a little bit. But the depth on that defensive line, can you go 2-3 deep? That was a question for this USC program. And with Bear Alexander potentially entering the transfer portal, that suddenly opens up a lot of recruiting resources for USC to get very aggressive in this second portal window opening in terms of adding depth to this defensive line. And we kind of had that conversation. Is one Bear Alexander worth more than 3 really quality defensive linemen? And I would argue that for this USC defense, in terms of the question marks that we have about the depth, if you can add 3 really quality defensive linemen using kind of the same amount of resources that you were using to keep Bear Alexander with this program, I think there's an argument to be made that this USC defense might benefit from adding 3 really solid players instead of just one guy that represents a lot of star talent for this program. And again, I think in a perfect world, USC fans are saying, all right, we keep Bear Alexander and we add 3 quality guys on that defensive line for some depth. I don't know if that's 100% a possibility, but if Bear Alexander does in fact enter the transfer portal, all those resources that you were using to get Bear Alexander to USC and keep him on this program can now be allocated to potentially add some more depth to this USC defensive line. And you look at all the programs that have elite defenses and had elite defensive lines. Yes, they had some game records, they had some star talent, but now I'm a true believer that you look at Michigan in 2023, you look at Georgia in 2021 and in 2022, what really made those defensive lines extremely special is that when they were taking their ones off the field to give them a break, and these guys are 300 plus pounds, they had quality football players coming onto the field to replace them. And that depth in the Big Ten going 14, 15 games of a season, that in my mind is extremely important. You are going to have teams in the Big Ten that are going to try to grind you down. And you have to have guys that you can rotate and keep fresh throughout 4 quarters of a game. And I think that represents a question mark that we had for USC and a question mark that maybe they could answer in the transfer portal with a little bit more funds that they now have to kind of build that depth on the defensive line. I think that's a really interesting conversation to dive into. So I guess to round out this portion of the conversation, in a perfect world for USC, you're able to keep Bear Alexander with this team because I think he's one of the best interior defensive linemen in college football heading into 2024 and also add some depth. But if Bear Alexander does, in fact, enter the transfer portal, I think you have Lincoln Riley, Danton Lynn, Eric Henderson now sitting on a lot of resources to really go add quality bodies to this USC defensive line. I think the other conversation you have to have is there are some guys on this roster that I am very excited about for the inside of this defensive line. Obviously, a guy like Isaiah Rakes, we've talked about a lot. Nate Clifton, up to 290 pounds, had played a ton of football at Vanderbilt over the last couple of years. You have a guy in Elijah Hughes, who I think played some really good football when he was physically probably not ready to play much football at that Power 5 level last year. What does he look like going into year 2? You have some guys that are coming in and guys like Jide Abisari, who I think have a lot of potential, could potentially be contributors year 1. But I'm really interested to see how this situation plays out. And if Bear Alexander does in fact enter the transfer portal, you're going to see Lincoln Riley, Coach Henderson, Danton Lynn get extremely aggressive because they'll have the opportunity to get aggressive. They'll have a lot of resources at their disposal to add a lot of quality depth to this USC defensive line. So that's the storyline that I'm following. Obviously, we want Bear Alexander to remain with this USC program. But if he does, in fact, leave, it's going to be a fun next couple of weeks to track what USC does in the transfer portal, specifically identifying guys on that defensive line to bring in and really formulate a complete defensive line that is deep heading into the Big Ten, heading into 2024. We'll continue to have this conversation as it plays out. Wanted to give you guys kind of some of my thoughts. Would love to hear from you guys. I completely can see y'all disagreeing with this take. I don't even know if I fully agree with this take or not. Would love to hear from you guys. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. Again, if you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.